everyone. It's Tuesday, August the 20th. I'm making another video today. We just had a full moon in Aquarius with a Mercury Cazimi that was square to Uranus, and I'm basically just making another video about this stuff. The mutable T-square is separating. Mars is separating from Jupiter. It's still kind of in effect, though. I basically, for this video, wanted to reflect. I had some loose ends. I realized that I had a lot of ideas for my last video, and some of them I didn't get into. And then also, since recording, some stuff has happened that sort of inspired a certain kind of train of thought. I should also it feels like I should mention it, that it's not related to what I'm doing today. And I live on the West Coast, and I've never been to Montreal before. But Montreal has had a water main break, and it looks like a mess. I feel sorry for my condolences to everybody in Montreal. But it's interesting that there's also a water main break in Calgary. And there's something about Saturn in Pisces. The moon is conjunct Saturn in Pisces as I'm recording this, which kind of reminds me of it. That there's something about the infrastructure of a city, infrastructure problems getting highlighted by this mutable T-square with the ruler of Pisces. So Saturn in Pisces, ruled by Jupiter, conjunct Mars, and then Venus and Virgo setting off the T-square. Going with this recent water main break in Montreal, and the fact that they had two water main breaks in Canada the same year you also had in Calgary, being a kind of a pattern, right? That also has astrological correspondence. I just thought I'd throw that in there, even though it's not real. Feel lucky not to be living in a city that has that problem. What I'm thinking of today basically is something that happened the other day, that I have two little dogs that I look after. And the story about these dogs, there's two of them, Daisy and June. And when I was a young man, I went and spent a whole year in Australia. And we had a family dog named Janice, which I actually named. The dog ended up having this name that sounded more like Janis Joplin. But what I had to name was to name it after Janus, the two-headed god of the past and the future. But nevertheless, when I went away to Australia, this dog passed away from natural old age. But I was away for a whole year, and I just kind of missed this. During this time, my family found it, to live in a house without a dog was unbearable. They had to get another one, and so didn't have anything to do with the selection process of the new dog. And then I came back from Australia in 2011 with my old dog dead and a new dog in its place. And that was also the year. There's something about coming back from a whole year, just doing your own thing overseas, and then having to readjust to a family situation, which has changed since you were there. It's just kind of disorienting, and that part of that contributed to me having a mental health crisis and stuff like that year. There are different factors, but the thing is that this dog was initially a dog that my dad had picked out, and that it was kind of like his dog, and he would have it at his family business and stuff like that. And my dad ended up passing away of an unexpected heart attack in 2013. So that was like 2 years after I got back from Australia, 3 years after he got the dog. And so our family has been looking after the dog, Daisy. It's been, whatever, without my dad around, for over a decade now. And so it's kind of funny because it's like I have it's my mom's dog. Oh, so you could say it's like my dad's dog, but it's my mom's dog. But I'm the one who has been walking the dog since I moved back to Ladner. And then in 2014, we got another dog called June, who Joon, named after Benny and June, the movie. And the two of them are cute little friends together. And Daisy is a terrier, a blonde terrier, very cute. And the funny thing is that like they're from an aesthetic point of view, Daisy looks like she looks like a teddy bear or something like that, right? But you wouldn't think it from looking at her. But the terrier, the Yorkshire Terrier, is bred to be a rodent killing dog. And my dad would often call her the rat dog, right? Because that's what she was trained for. And the other day, and I think about like this whole like theme of like cute animals is that like there's tons of rabbits around where I live, and there's tons of rabbits just like populating in my backyard. And there's just like constantly these like cute little bunnies hopping around. And then the other day, the cute little dog killed a cute little rabbit, or found a dead one and retrieved it. But there's something about like the full moon, which had there's something about Pluto, first of all, right? And also the image of the hold on. Also, if you use dog astrology, Daisy's a Virgo, so maybe that goes with this Virgo Venus opposite Saturn thing. But there's just something about this which I used in my previous video, this one, right? Where the 9 of discs, the second decan of Virgo, the woman is she has a pet bird, which is like a falcon or something like that, right? And it's like, there's this idea that it's like a luxurious life that's separate from, the walled garden keeps out the gritty stuff of the outside world out, but on her hand, she has perched a bird, which it could be like a hawk that goes and eats rat, or I don't know, catch it. What do you do? Like, there's something about the symbolism of the hawk that represents like the animal nature, right? Or it's a glossed over in a kind of a bourgeois almost like luxury life, but there's a sort of acknowledgement of the little like animal that is a hawk that could like swoop around like a falcon or whatever, right? And there's something about with Pluto too, Pluto being like the sort of like, there's some sort of like, could be like the force of oppression or restraint, or it could also be like the thing that's being okay, there's something about all this rather than just getting into. I had a more specific idea about this, relating to what people tend to call the meta-crisis, right? The meta-crisis tends to be this idea that, like, in modern times, especially, usually that kind of implies that things made more sense at a previous point in time, but modern life is kind of chaotic. And this is generally, a lot of this has to do with the problem, like, people will take, like, multiculturalism, like, before we only knew this one way of life, but now we know there's all these other different cultures that have the idea of multiple perspectives. Everybody has different perspectives, or that the central, majoritarian view has been decentralized, and people are confused. Or there could be like also the information explosion, right? With the changes of technology, the way we used to do things have been disrupted, and we have so much access to information that we're just overloaded, and we're just stunned. We can't do anything but sit around and look at our cell phones all day, right? There's a lot of different variations to the theme of this problem, but there's something about, it usually is tied into this sort of like conservative reaction to the developments of changes and developments in culture and stuff like that, and this idea that things are becoming more chaotic and we're losing some like truth that used to be there or something like that, right? That's generally tends, I don't know, maybe that's my best attempt at explaining it, but there's something about, if you look at the example of my dog, the terrier, killing rabbits, is that there's a certain kind of utilitarianism, right? In that the idea of whether you're keeping animals as pets or if animals are like trained to do jobs, right? And so you have all these dog breeds that are the result of people training dogs for certain jobs to fill a utilitarian function, right? Now, the thing is, first of all, I wasn't the one who selected this dog, and the dog wasn't selected to fulfill a utilitarian function. It was just a coincidence that was the kind of dog she was. The main thing about is that my family has this tendency to, rather than to only do things like using the SPCA to adopt pets, or the or going to rescue organizations to take care of stray dogs or feral animals. And in the case of both of these dogs we had, they were both rescued from native reservations where First Nations people were having a problem with animal control, basically, right? And there's something interesting about this too, in that I mentioned that we got the dog when I was in Australia, and I haven't done that much traveling, honestly. I did spend that year in Australia, but I did also go to Eastern Europe, and it's interesting just, like, you don't, to make it so it's not just about, like, indigenous people having animal control problems. In Eastern Europe, they have huge animal control problems. It's interesting to, like, go to a place that is, I don't know. I mean, I guess Eastern Europe is considered, I don't want to use the word third world, but it's like, it's not the same as obviously being in the West. It has a different set of standards and stuff like that. And it was just an interesting cultural experience that, like, I stayed at this hostel, and when you're like, went down the elevator, they would have like the lobby would just have the doors open all the time, and people would leave out leftovers or like scraps of food in the lobby so that stray dogs would just come and eat. And it's like, you don't see that around here, right? It's such a different thing. So we live in a world where we have where I live, there's much stricter ideas of animal control, and the two dogs were, the point of having these dogs is more of the utilitarian focus of dealing with an animal control problem, rather than the dogs serving some kind of utilitarian function themselves, right? But the dogs have been trained, like Daisy has been trained to kill rodents, and so it's like this kind of like the sense of working at cross purposes, in the sense that the way our family works, we don't actually want her to go and kill all the baby rabbits. So I have to now be like vigilant against stopping this dog from doing the thing that she has been bred to do. And after she kills rabbits, she like wags her tail and looks at me and looks for me to, like, congratulate. Good job! You're doing what you're fulfilling your purpose. And this is like kind of interesting. I'm talking about like from the point of an astrologer, or like the idea of people are like, what's my purpose, right? Like, what's my like, I was put here on life in this world to do a thing, but we live in this weird, crazy, chaotic, meaningless world, and nothing makes sense. Why does nothing make sense? Why is it all? And it's like, well, I mean, I have a purpose. Like, I have a purpose to go and make sure that this dog that's been bred to kill rodents doesn't do what it was bred to do. But the point of this is because it's more for the sake of animal control, or not just killing dogs like this who are roaming feral on the street. Like, you don't want to have a pack of terriers running around just killing rabbits or whatever, right? So you have to have rescue organizations. But the thing is, it's like there's so many things that like I'm unemployed, I'm disabled, and it's like so much of my just day-to-day life is like babysitting little animals. And it's like, what about, like, hold on, this is a dog that my dad got when I was in Australia, And like if I had any like if I had control over my own life, I don't know exactly if I would be like just doing the backpacker guy thing. Like maybe that's okay that that was just something I tried out a bit in my 20s, but it sort of just feels like I'm like caught in this structure that is like inherently doesn't make a lot of sense, right? It's like that I have, and it goes with this Terence McKenna thing, where Terence McKenna was saying like it helps to have your own sense of purpose or your own sense of aim or your own sense of direction, because otherwise you will just get pulled into whatever the most immediate. And so like there's all this stuff of me, like I start my day taking these dogs for walks so that they don't shit in the house because they're rescue animals and they're not trained very well. And then also just like having to babysit these dogs to make sure they don't kill animals, which is what they've been trained to do. And it's like it's a sort of like so like the whole like I have to spend all this energy trying to like control things that from not functioning the way that they were designed to function. And it's just sort of like and I'm trying to just use this in a way that I don't want to just be hung up on the specific idea of pet care, but the sense that modern life feels like a big clusterfuck basically of being like I have been or like I have somehow like we have the idea that we used to have some kind of like innate purpose. And then that has been, it's basically this deconstructing kind of compost pile where everything is just coming apart, basically, right? And it's sort of like the idea of like but the thing is, and the idea that there's so much of what when people go and actually hire people to be astrologers, a lot of what it has to do, well, but probably one of the big concerns of like why anybody would want to look at a natal chart anyways is there some sort of like divine pattern that is like telling me what my purpose is in life, right? But then if you apply, you can also do things like just like look at what your temperament is, right? And like there's something about like this funny about like dog astrology in that my other dog June is you can just if you look at sun sign astrology, the first dog, which is a terrier, is a Virgo, and then the second dog, which is the mutt, is a Cancer. And there's something about like I understand there's something, I don't know, maybe I make sense of this dog's personality by thinking about this dog as being like she really likes to sunbathe, right? More so than the other dog. And there's something about Cancer being like less, or just being like a Cancer type of personality wants to just absorb a nice environment. It wants to or to just like sit there and bask in the sun kind of thing, right? And soak it up. And there's that being that kind of receptive quality going with Cancer. I don't know. You can use these things to, like I'm trying to say, you could be like a temperament and not necessarily be just being associated with your utilitarian purpose in life. But the sense that they're like, it's not that utilitarian purpose is gone, but it's just in this way that it's all kind of like deconstruct, like it's like a postmodernist deconstructive situation where there is a purpose, but it's the same thing. I mean, you could also, with keeping on the dog thing, I was thinking it's also very similar to the problem with pit bull owners. Because pit bulls were bred as fighting dogs, or there's all these dogs that were bred as guard dogs, and that you can have them fill that function in a utilitarian way. But then there's also all these problems of dogs attacking people or dogs getting into fights with other dogs. There was in the news somebody's like dog got killed by another dog in the park like this, right? And there's so much. There's this kind of stereotype, and I'm probably pissing these people off, right? But there's a stereotype of like entire communities and like Facebook groups of people like investing lots of time and energy to be defensive of pit bulls. Like you can like have a dog of this breed or whatever kind of these, either whether they're guard dogs or fighting dogs or something. You can have a dog of this breed, and it doesn't have to be violent and aggressive And I mean, but the thing is, you can train it so that it's nice, and you don't have to like look at them like this way. But it's like they were bred for that utilitarian function, and investing a lot of energy to try to counteract the image that was constructed for this animal, or this purpose that was constructed for this animal, and then not saying what this dog is supposed to do, but saying that you don't like all the stuff that's been put into making this thing this way. It doesn't have to be like this. And even if it does still go and kill other dogs or bite people, I mean, it doesn't have to be. This is the way things are, but we're gonna put lots of energy into trying to like make it so it's not like this. And it's like, and rather than just, but what's also funny is that when it comes to dog breeds, it's not. There's this messy thing where it's not exactly nature, because we are selectively breeding dogs to do specific things. Right? The dogs just aren't their own thing without us having a hand in breeding them to be this way. And then we have these like dog shows which are all about breeding confirmation, right? To be like, who can keep the dog's breed confirmed to this image the best, the profile that we have of what this breed is supposed to be. But they're not natural. They're things that we came up with, right? And it's also even food is like this, because like broccoli, cauliflower were things that we invented by selectively breeding plants to be a certain way, that we created these things that wouldn't have been, I mean, could have only been there as potentialities in nature, right? And and then it's interesting to take this whole problem and then apply it to the idea of Jungian archetypes and all this kind of stuff, because when it comes to Jungian archetypes, there is part of the whole thing is that like the idea that there's this divine heavenly structure of patterns that is superior to what man can create for himself, but there is like we can have a hand in dog breeding, right? And in some way, like what's the difference between like an archetype and like a certain pattern for like how you would breed a dog? Right? Because the whole idea of archetypes is that there are patterns inherent in nature, that even if you took human beings out of the picture and just had an animal world, that certain repeating patterns in the animal world are themselves archetypal, even if it's like, because like you could like, if you could just, maybe like, if you imagine a situation that's just a wild natural environment with no humans in it, you could still have if you wanted to get into this parental thing or familial thing, you could still have parent-child archetypes playing out in animals, and then seeing whatever man is doing, like man is like an animal because, the birds lay eggs and make nests, and human beings have children and create homes and all, and it's that is just man being an animal, right? And that man tries to reach for the divine, but in reaching for the divine he uses animal images, because even like the whole thing of a heavenly father or whatever, like that is used as the Christian God image. There's nothing necessarily heavenly about fatherhood, because like snakes have fathers. Snakes, you know what I'm saying? Like reptiles have fathers, amphibians have all the little like things squirming around in the mud have parents, right? And it's sort of like it's at an, but we're using our innate animal imagination to paint a world of the divine. And then you can see a similar thing in astrology, because people look at the stars and they try to make sense. Is it just a bunch of random dots, or is there a pattern there? No, we see an image. And then so many of the images are animal images. You've got a bull, you've got a crab, you've got a lion, you've got, there's an animal. We try to apprehend the divine with an animal imagination, right? But then when we are actually dealing with real animals, we actually can create the patterns by choosing how we selectively breed things. So we actually have some kind of a will in creating the situation that we're in, right? but what's funny is that like you can't, obviously this takes place over long periods of time, and we're basically just walking into this situation where we're inheriting all these different forms and all these different patterns. But the thing is, it's like it's that were created by our ancestors, right? That we're just walking into this pattern that was set up by our ancestors. And then so oftentimes people want to like progress, or they want to like evolve out of some kind of old pattern that isn't working anymore. But then we just fall back into the old trap, the same way that like this dog, we don't need this dog to kill rabbits, but that's what it's been trained to do. The dog is just innately bred. It's a rabbit killing dog. It looks cute, but no, it's a vicious killer. So the point is that we have to like, why, if we didn't want this dog to kill rabbits, why did we breed it to be this way in the first place? Well, we didn't intentionally pick this dog out. We were just rescuing dogs for the sake of having animal control, and then so that we're not like some third world country or whatever, right? But then it starts to feel like we're living the state of affairs that it's a highly civilized, highly controlled dynamic, but that control is basically, it feels like it's oppressing us, because it's oppressing all these old structures of what used to define who we are, and being all like, oh, I've been instinctively trained to be this way, but now I'm told that I'm not supposed to be this way, and so I just have to basically put a lot of effort into repressing myself, and like it takes so much effort to stop something from doing what it would naturally do, that you kind of burn out all your energy, and just being all like, well, what have we done today? I've managed to stop the dogs from shitting on the carpet, stop the dogs from eating rabbits, stop myself from being the person that I would normally, like I've managed to fight everything and control everything, and now I'm just exhausted. And I like, what instead of just stopping everything from being what it is, what can you do to like help things just naturally, but is there any natural expression of things that is free from our manipulations and our attempts to like program things and nudge things in different directions, and then that you want to like have agency, you want to do that with your own life, you want to write your own script, have autonomy to make your own choices, but we're constantly in the conditioning of our culture is always trying to be like, we need like, the same way that we have all these dogs that have been trained to be like killers or guard dogs or rabbit hunters, we have all these people that have trained to be some other way, and that way is not, we need to train them to be some other way, but we haven't figured, we don't really know what that is supposed to be. We just know that you're not supposed to be the way we were before, and if you can just not be toxic, right? If you can just not be a bad influence, that's basically good enough, right? Like, or I don't know, like there's some kind of like, it feels like there's so much, like it's like Alan Watts had this idea, like you have to like get out of your own way, but it just feels like being like completely like bogged down in a situation. You can't just like go and just do your thing. You have to like constantly be like fighting the whole situation as it is, because the situation as it is just inherently a bit of a clusterfuck, right? Excuse my language. It just seems like the best way to describe it. And then there's some other idea that I had, but it may be related, but it's kind of like taking a turn in another direction. Like, I wonder if I should, like, if I'm gonna, like, maybe I should just stop the video now for the sake of, like, damage control. Like, if I try to, like, fit the other idea in, it'll just be too much. I mean, well, for the sake of just getting it out there, maybe I'll do it. Because this relates to something. I realized that in my other video, I was talking about the problem of binary thinking. Right? That there's this people getting caught in this binary system of that people are specifically sick of these days because of, in a political sense, it feels like you're trapped into this, like, you're either with us or you're against us. You're either on this side or you're on that side. and there's no ability to break free and do something like actually new, that you're just stuck into either do you conform to this thing or do you deviate from this thing. And there's some other side of this that I wasn't getting into because it's a kind of a can of worms, right? And I have to admit that, like, for a long time, I was involved in a meditation practice that was the person who led it was, you could say, a devotee of Ramana Maharshi, because that's the person that she put on the picture frame on the shelf. And one of the things that's interesting about all this is that there's a kind of Cartesian quality to it, because I've heard other people talk about Ramana Maharshi and compare him to Rene Descartes, and I almost kind of wonder if there are these people that aren't categorized as philosophers, but like you've got people who are answering questions, and you've got people from around the world seeking spiritual wisdom. I have this sort of sense that, like, maybe there's some influence of some guy who's read a bunch of philosophy books, and he's like, okay, now I'm going to ask the guru in India questions that are, and the questions that I'm asking are somehow colored by all this, this Western influence, and we're going to see what the guy who's been living in a cave for 16 years has to say about it, kind of thing. Ramana Maharshi was not coming from a place of being a scholar or studying things or stuff like that. He was just a guy who went quiet and hung out in a cave for about 16 or 17 years, as far as I know. And then he came out of the cave and started talking to people, right? With some demand, the people wanted him to like be a spiritual teacher, right? And but a lot of the Ramana Maharshi teaching has to do with this, like, it gets categorized as being non-dual, but the actual teacher that I was working with, she's like, non-dual is it's supposed to be non-conceptual. It's supposed to be about getting quiet, and duality or non-duality is just a concept, right? But Ramana Maharshi had this, nonetheless, used the concepts, and he would say that, the problem about people seeking God is that they're seeking God as an object when God is the subject. And it's using that subject-object dualism to make that sort of distinction of, like, rather than looking for something out there, you're going inside or something. But then my own teacher will say things like, there is no inside, there is no outside. Which it seems like it's non-dual, but then it's like, is that non-dualistic saying there's no, she's like, non-dual, there's no, non-dualism isn't a thing, it's just an idea. So, but this is kind of like having a meditation teacher who will probably frustrate you when you're trying to approach things conceptually. But okay, nonetheless, there's like subject-object dualism in that sense. And there's also there's subject-object dualism in another sense, a psychological sense, and relating to this whole thing about having a male gaze or having a female gaze, right? And the idea is that there's a trend on TikTok anyways that is catering to this kind of thing about, like, people showing you this binary dualism, right? Between dressing for a male gaze or dressing for a female gaze, right? Or different kinds of media that are designed to appeal to a male gaze or designed to appeal to a female gaze. Now, the specific thing here is that there's also this thing that's woven into all this that has to do with sexual objectification, right? That your desire, like the idea that desire is like rooted into this idea of like desire for an object, right? Like if you are, and it could be like, you could equate this to like, not just about sex, but like food or something, right? You are hungry, you are seeking breakfast or lunch as an object to satisfy your hunger, right? And then there's this idea that like your subjectivity is formed by these desires, where if you are in a city and you are like, I'm hungry, I need to get lunch. Your attention is going to be tuned to looking around for restaurants, right? So you are having the subjective experience of a hungry person looking for a meal, right? And the whole idea of like the male gaze and the female gaze is like trying to present yourself in such a way that, if similar to like if you were a restaurateur and you wanted to build the outside of your restaurant so that it would be noticed by a person who is hungry looking for a place to eat on the street, right? So the idea is that the whole split between the male gaze and the female gaze is basically catering to a subjectivity based on these kinds of like desire cravings or desire hungers or something like that, right? And it also goes with advertising and marketing, in that like if you have some sort of, we live in this media saturated environment where from a young age we've all been exposed to these images getting blasted at us all the time, which are designed to bypass our rational mind and go and hit us in a way that's like, you're hungry for food. You're craving, physical contact or something like that. You have these id responses that are related to you as just being an animal that is below your conscious awareness, and we're hyper exposed to an environment that's always trying to like manipulate us by appealing to these things. And then I think first of all, you don't want to reduce subjectivity down to that level. Because as soon as you just reduce your subjectivity down to like, I'm just a hungry animal, you've lost your human ability to discern things and look at things critically, and you are just a hungry animal if that's what your subjectivity is, right? And the point of this is that there's this whole problem, because it's been couched into this conversation that it's not good to objectify people, right? Because to objectify somebody is just to view them like you're a hungry person looking for a meal, and they're just a hamburger that's going to satisfy your desire, right? Whereas when you appreciate the person's also a subject, you appreciate that they have their own desires, or they have their own perspective at least, right? But there's a certain problem here, in that with subjectivity and objectivity, the idea is that the same way that like, okay, I can bring this back to the dogs, I guess, right? Because I have two dogs, and the other day, one of them killed a rabbit. The one found another rabbit and was sniffing it. And I heard the squeak, and I had to like pull the dog away from the rabbit, but the rabbit was alive, right? And one dog is trained to be a killer of rabbits. The other dog is a mutt and doesn't have this breeding confirmation. And she likes chasing rabbits, but she isn't the kind of dog that would kill something if she caught it, right? So there's a sort of idea of like, if you can put this into like a conversation about objects and subjects, right? That the same rabbit is an object to the same dogs who both have the subjectivity of dogs. They see a little animal running, they want to chase it, and that's a common subjectivity to all dogs. However, through conditioning, we breed certain dogs to have different subjectivities, in that one dog's subjectivity would kill the animal, the other's dog wouldn't, right? The other dog is just trained to react in a certain way that the other dog wouldn't. And these are things that are not inherent, but are things that we intentionally cultivate, we intentionally create, right? That we as human beings have an ability that the animals don't, because we can actually understand this and have some degree of control over it, and have a creative hand in how we are conditioning our environment, and not just conditioning our environment, but conditioning subjectivity itself, right? And the problem about there's a sort of like the rut that people fall into with like the subject object conversation is that to objectify somebody is to see them as being your lunch, basically, right? But then to see the subjectivity is to see something else that wants to have lunch, or something else that has its own needs and desires, or something like that. But it's not just appreciating that, oh, you're not just an object to satisfy me, but you also have your own desires. But the point is that the desires themselves are to some degree they're inherent, because you're at an animal level. You're gonna need to eat, or else you're gonna die, right? So or you're gonna need to reproduce, or else there aren't gonna be any people. So there's some level there, an involuntary, there's a thing that is built into being a person or an animal, but at some level, the subjectivity is created by conditioning that isn't just some. If in the sense of the natural world, the conditioning is just natural to whatever the environmental factors are. But there's some way that by being human beings, we've been able to create a kind of an artificial world where the factors aren't just natural factors, they're human created factors. And then in order to survive in that world, you're not surviving in just a wild jungle. You're surviving in a human society where we actually have decisions to make about what kind of conditioning we want to subject people to, and what kind of people we want people to be. That we have we're not just passively reacting to the circumstances. We actually have a hand in writing the script, writing the code for how we want things to be, right? And that but it's like there's some kind of irony in this, because it's like I feel like I'm interested in understanding this from a conceptual level, but then when it comes to like you often run into this other thing with the dualistic split about like the mind-body dualism or the mind-matter dualism, and there's often this criticism of like, oh, well, you understand all this thing conceptually in your head, but what does it mean in terms of your day-to-day life, right? And in terms of my day-to-day life, I have to just look after these dogs and make sure they don't kill rabbits, right? And I don't, if I got my own dog, maybe I would get. There's this question of like, would it make more sense to get dogs that were suited for a utilitarian purpose, or is the fact that you're adopting dogs for the sake of animal control, is that itself a utilitarian purpose? But then you're like, this is not something for me. It's all bound up in this thing about being dependent on, living with my family, and like, what kind of dog would I have if I just got my own dog, right? It's a question that I never consider, right? Because I've never been in a position where I'd even think about such a thing. I'm too busy looking after these other dogs that my dad decided to adopt 3 years before he had a heart attack, right? So it's like, you're kind of like just inheriting, there's all these people who had more power in terms of making choices, who have made all these choices, and they're like wheels that are still spinning in motion, and you're kind of like, I can understand the situation, I can see the spinning wheel, but I don't necessarily have the power to put the brakes on the wheel, slow it down, and then also having input into like, well, do we have a creative capacity in saying where these wheels are, what direction are these wheels going to turn in, right? Can we put the brakes on, slow down, and then have a creative decision-making process, creative choice in what direction we go in the future? Or are we just like, this big spinning wheel has a lot of momentum, better watch out or you're just gonna fucking crush you, oh my god, and you have to just be like, you live your whole life in this like, oh my god, there's this big spinning wheel that's just got out of control, I can't do anything about it because I'm just some schmuck or whatever, right? You're like, how do you actually have control, or do you just be like, well, I'm just gonna make sure that the big spinning wheel doesn't crush me, and that's good enough, right? And then as long as you don't make a huge mess out of the situation, you're I don't know. It's just a riff today. I'm just riffing on it. But these are this is where my creative process is flowing since this weird full moon Mercury Cazimi thing. I just thought I would make another video to continue it along. Thank you for listening. Catch you next time, or vice versa. I don't know. Please like and subscribe. Tell all your friends and family. Tell all the people who like astrology that Dan's making videos and that they're really good, and obviously it's worth checking out. Thank you for supporting me. Have a good one.